Have you ever imagined defeating a narcissist without raising your voice, without fighting, without exhausting yourself, and without even touching them? It might sound impossible until you understand what truly destroys them from the inside. A narcissist lives for applause, but they die in silence. They feed off your fear, your self-doubt, your need for approval. But the moment you begin to see through the mask, when you stop explaining yourself, stop chasing, stop justifying, it changes everything. And that invisible shift, that's what humiliates them most. Because suddenly, you become untouchable. Otto Kernberg, one of the leading authorities on narcissistic personality disorder, revealed something powerful. The narcissist doesn't survive on strength. They survive on your emotional fragility. While you feel weak, they feel powerful. But when you finally see that they are the most fragile one in the relationship, that everything they show is just a carefully rehearsed act, it all starts to crumble. Because a narcissist cannot stand being truly seen. They need you to believe in their performance. But when you stop watching the show and start seeing the actor behind the mask, that's when they begin to fall apart. This isn't about revenge, it's about freedom. And there is no greater humiliation for a narcissist than realizing the person they once controlled now looks at them without pain, without love, without even anger, just indifference. That moment, when you step off the stage and close the curtain, is when their inner panic begins. Kernberg called this the narcissistic collapse, the moment their inflated ego disintegrates because it no longer finds a reflection in your eyes. And that mirror? You can take it away without saying a single word. This cold, silent, strategic move is exactly what Kernberg described as one of the few effective ways to disarm a narcissist without confrontation. Because what truly destabilizes them is not a direct fight. They're prepared for that. What breaks them is your emotional absence. When you stop trying to be understood, when you stop reacting, when you quietly and mentally walk away from the game, you win. And they feel every inch of your withdrawal as their artificial structure collapses. In this video, you'll discover how strategic detachment combined with emotional clarity becomes a silent, devastating weapon. We'll walk step by step through Kernberg's principles for exposing a narcissist without ever needing to touch them. Because sometimes the biggest blow is simply walking away with your head held high. While they search in vain for the reflection of someone who's no longer there, the first thing you need to understand is this: a narcissist is not strong. They only act like they are. According to Otto Kernberg, this grandiose behavior is actually a desperate defense against a deep sense of emptiness and inferiority. Behind the arrogance is a constant fear of being exposed, of being seen as mediocre, of losing control over the idealized image they project. That's why they crave your admiration, your attention, your emotional reactions. They rely on how you see them to keep the illusion of power alive. This is the most fragile point in their entire psychological structure. They need you to stay in the game. They need you to care. Kernberg explains that narcissists build their identity on external validation, especially from people who are emotionally involved. So the more you try to please them, justify yourself, or prove your worth, the more emotional fuel you're giving them. That's not love. That's emotional survival for them and psychological exhaustion for you. But the moment you begin to break this cycle, something deeply symbolic starts to happen. You begin to starve the narcissist emotionally. There's no greater humiliation for someone who lives for admiration than the silence of the person who once placed them on a pedestal. Don't scream. Don't accuse. Don't beg. Just disappear emotionally. Make yourself inaccessible, not as punishment, but as a conscious decision. That will shake them far more than any confrontation ever could. Because the narcissist has no defense against your indifference. Kernberg explains that narcissists experience almost unbearable inner pain when they're deprived of attention from their victims. It's a kind of silent breakdown. Outwardly, they may seem calm, cold, indifferent, but inside, everything is collapsing. Because what sustains them isn't reality. It's the illusion of constant control and admiration. And when that illusion starts to break, they enter emotional, psychological, and sometimes even physical collapse. That's why the most powerful way to humiliate a narcissist without touching them is by cutting off their supply, the emotional mirror they use to feel special. Kernberg called this a strategic withdrawal of transference. In other words, you shut off the emotional current. You disconnect the mirror, and suddenly, they're completely lost because they have no internal center to hold on to. The pain they feel is the echo of the emptiness they've always tried to hide. When you stop reacting, stop explaining, stop defending your emotions, the narcissist is forced to face their greatest fear: nothingness. Kernberg described this state as a narcissistic collapse, where the grandiose personality implodes without external reinforcement. They expect your tears, your anger, your desperation, but they don't know what to do with your silence. It's like the stage is set, the lights are on, but the audience has left. Your emotional withdrawal isn't cruelty, it's self-preservation. It's maturity. It's the decision to no longer beg for crumbs or fight to be seen. And to a narcissist, that's unbearable. Kernberg emphasizes that these individuals have a distorted relationship with emotional autonomy. They don't know what to do with someone who doesn't need them. And when they realize they can no longer control your feelings, they panic. Even if they try to hide it behind sarcasm or indifference, after you withdraw, they'll likely attempt a subtle comeback. They'll test whether they still have power over you. They may send vague messages, post indirectly on social media, or ask about you through others. All of it is a desperate attempt to reopen the emotional channel you closed. But Kernberg is clear: the narcissist doesn't come back out of love. They come back because they lost symbolic power over you. That's a wounded ego, not regret. This is when your stance must be firm. The worst thing you can do to them is remain emotionally stable. When you're unbothered, uninterested, and grounded, you ruin the game. And that's when the humiliation begins, when they realize they've lost control of the narrative. Kernberg calls this narcissistic disorganization, when their defense system fails because there's no longer a subject, you, to validate their false grandiose self. Make no mistake, the narcissist will try to flip the script. They'll call you cold, ungrateful, selfish. But that's just the reaction of someone who knows they've lost power. And there's no greater revenge than moving on in peace and silence. Because nothing hits a narcissist harder than the emotional calm of someone they can no longer control. What Otto Kernberg highlights as one of the most effective ways to weaken a narcissist is the power of indifference. But be careful, indifference is not contempt. Contempt is still emotional engagement. Indifference is the total absence of emotional energy. When you feel nothing, expect nothing, and react to nothing, you become invisible to them. And that terrifies them. The narcissistic mind doesn't know how to handle endings without noise. It craves drama, pain, a final scene. So when you leave the story without a fight, without a speech, without tears, they collapse. Because they can't play the villain if you refuse to play the victim. Kernberg said this kind of non-confrontational emotional cutoff triggers the original narcissistic wound, the very one that made them who they are. You don't need to expose them, scream, or prove anything. Your emotional absence does that for you. The narcissist humiliates themselves trying to react to your silence, disguising their desperation as arrogance. And that's when you finally see their true face. Not one of power, but of fear. Not control, but panic. Kernberg explained that this is the most dangerous and most revealing moment in the narcissist's personality, when they lose control of their image. That's when they'll try guilt. They'll say you're heartless, that you don't care, that you're ruining everything. But don't fall for it. Those words aren't about you. They're about their panic over no longer being able to manipulate you. And that, in itself, is the ultimate humiliation They're finally feeling what they always made you feel. And now, you're the one in control, not to hurt them, but to free yourself. Emotional indifference is your shield, not to wound, but to protect what's left of you. And when that shield takes effect, the narcissist shrinks. Not because you attacked, but because you walked away with dignity. And there's no greater humiliation than being forgotten by someone who once gave you everything. When you break free from emotional dependency on a narcissist, something new begins, the quiet rebuilding of your identity. Kernberg reminds us that one of the biggest scars from this kind of relationship is the confusion between who you are and who the narcissist made you believe you were. For so long, you tried to live up to impossible expectations, defend yourself against twisted accusations, carry guilt that never belonged to you. The humiliation you inflicted wasn't revenge. It was the natural result of something far more powerful. You came back to yourself. At this point, the narcissist realizes they've lost more than a person. They've lost their mirror. They panic. They try to reverse the story, but their old tricks no longer work. And this, Kernberg says, is where true recovery begins. While you move forward, they stay stuck, desperately trying to recreate a dynamic that no longer exists. That cuts deep, because it shows their manipulation no longer works. You don't need a new relationship or social media proof of your healing. The narcissist's real humiliation happens in the silence of your evolution. They can feel it when you expect nothing, miss nothing, and no longer move from fear or longing. What they see now is someone who finally understood the game and chose to stop playing. And that crumbles everything they built on control. As Kernberg explains, the deepest narcissistic collapse happens when the victim becomes emotionally free. That's the most symbolic moment of all, because while they twist and turn, trying to reenact old scenes, you're living a new story. One where they have no role anymore. Your new reality leaves no space for them. And that screams louder than any blocked message or ignored call. Otto Kernberg would say that's the narcissist's real trauma. Not being needed, not being feared, not even being remembered. And while they try to figure out how they lost control, you're busy rediscovering your strength, quietly, and with no need to explain. Their humiliation is knowing you no longer seek their love, approval, or applause. You just want peace. And peace is something a narcissist can never give, because where there's peace, there's no space for the chaos they feed on. The real victory over a narcissist doesn't come through shouting, scenes, or revenge. It comes through silence, through maturity, through time. Otto Kernberg said that true healing from narcissistic abuse happens when you no longer rely on the relationship to feel whole. When your pain becomes wisdom and your wounds become strength, there's nothing left for them to win. They might try to be present, but they can no longer be relevant. And that's what hurts them the most, realizing you feel nothing. No hatred, no love, no pain, just a silence that burns louder than any scream. Because narcissists understand conflict. They thrive on drama. But what they'll never understand is your emotional silence, your lack of expectations, your peace, and that's what completely disarms them. You're no longer playing. You've walked off the stage. And with every ignored attempt, every unread message, every reaction that never comes, they feel the loss. Because to a narcissist, the worst defeat is losing the audience that once made them feel powerful, and now they're performing for no one. What remains for you is something they'll never have: peace, emotional freedom, the deep, quiet sense that you don't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. You rebuilt your dignity in silence. And that rebuilding, that personal victory, is the ultimate triumph. Because while they're still trying to figure out what happened, you've already understood everything. You've turned the page. You've rewritten the story with your own voice. And this time, your voice doesn't need to shout. It just needs to move forward. Otto Kernberg would call this the triumph of a healthy ego. And that, truly, is the final humiliation for a narcissist, to see that you don't need them, not even as an enemy, that they no longer occupy even your suffering. Because when you truly overcome a narcissist, you don't even care if they know. And that's what destroys them the most. Something deeply powerful happens when you realize you don't have to defeat the narcissist. You just have to stop playing the game. The pain that once held you hostage begins to dissolve the moment you understand. Your real power was never about making them suffer. It was about no longer letting them decide who you are. Their humiliation doesn't come from your revenge. It comes from your absence. And that's when your freedom begins. That if this message hits something deep inside you, it's because you already know. The most powerful way to win is by not playing their game. Now imagine how many people are still trapped, not knowing this truth. You have the power to set someone free just by sharing this video. So if this helped you, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who needs to wake up. You never know whose life you might change with one silent truth.